The land was dry as bone, cracked beneath the sun like an old man's skin. Nothing lived for long out there on the Wyoming plains, not unless it had teeth, grit, or a gun. Silas Reed had all three. He'd built his cabin away from the world, tucked between rolling hills and the dying branches of forgotten cottonwoods, far from the judgment of men and the memories that clawed behind his eyes. That morning, as dust swirled across the hardpan like spirits in mourning, Silas spotted movement near the edge of his property. A shape, low to the ground, crawling. He approached slow, rifle in hand, expecting a coyote or drunkard. But what he found was neither. It was a man, barely breathing, skin stretched thin over brittle bones, mouth caked with sand. His eyes fluttered open at the shadow that fell across him. "Water," he rasped. Silas hesitated, then he lowered the rifle. He carried the man inside, gave him a sip from the rain barrel, fed him strips of dried meat softened in stew. The old man didn't speak much. His clothes were tattered black robes, the kind preachers used to wear. Around his neck hung a cross so rusted it looked melted by fire. That night, as wind moaned across the plains, the stranger stirred. Silas sat nearby, boots on the floor, cleaning his knife out of habit. "They'll come," the old man whispered suddenly. His voice was thin as breath. "When the sun dies, they'll find me." Silas raised an eyebrow. "Who?" The man's fingers twitched against the blanket. "The daughters. 13, dressed in white, eyes like winter. You bury me, Cowboy, you bury me proper." He said nothing else. Before dawn he died, breath slipping away without sound or struggle. Silas sat with the body until the light cracked the horizon. The fire in the hearth had long since gone cold, and silence pressed thick against the walls. Before we uncover what buried truths await Silas, make sure to subscribe to the channel. These lands hold stories few dare to tell, and you won't want to miss what comes next. Silas stared at the body. He wasn't one for keeping company, dead or alive. Still, something about the old man pulled at him. Guilt, maybe, or duty. Maybe just the old ache in his bones that never let him rest. He wrapped the corpse in burlap, tied it with rope and slung it over his horse. The cedar tree near the gulch was old and bent, roots clutching the earth like gnarled fists. He figured it would do. As he rode out, clouds gathered in the east. The wind had changed. It smelled like rain or something worse. He didn't notice not yet that white feathers clung to the hem of his coat, or that the air behind him had stilled. Not yet, but soon. The cedar tree stood like a sentinel at the edge of the gulch, its twisted limbs clawing at the sky. Silas had never liked it. Something about the way it leaned, the way its bark peeled like sunburned skin. Still, it was the only tree for miles, and the only place that felt far enough from the cabin. He dismounted slow, lowering the burlap-wrapped body onto the dry ground. The horse shifted, uneasy. Flies buzzed, but not around the corpse. They circled something unseen, higher up, then scattered as wind broke through. Silas grabbed his shovel from the saddle. The earth was stubborn, cracked deep. It took over an hour to dig a grave wide enough, his palms blistering despite the calluses. He didn't complain. The work helped keep the thoughts away. Thoughts of what the man had said, of the way his eyes looked, not empty, but waiting. As he dug, a memory clawed its way up. Years ago, that same spot had drawn his dog into a fit, digging frantically, growling at nothing. Silas had pulled the mutt back and filled the hole, never looking to see what was down there. He forced the thought away, sweat trickling into his eyes. The grave was ready. He lowered the man in. No prayers, no words. Just dirt, thudding over burlap, dull and final. The wind kicked up as he finished, slicing across the plains like a blade. Then came the feathers, white, delicate, drifting down from nowhere, no birds above, no nests. Just feathers landing on his hat, his shoulders, and the grave. He stared. One landed on the cedar's bark and stuck there, unmoving despite the wind. His heart thudded once, hard. The air shifted. Stillness, a wrong kind of silence. He turned his head slowly, scanning the horizon. Nothing, just dust and sky. But something had changed. He wiped his hands, grabbed his gear, and mounted up. The horse hesitated, muscles tense beneath him. It took coaxing to turn her back toward the cabin. The ride home was quiet, too quiet. Not even the buzz of cicadas or the distant yip of coyotes. Just the sound of hoofbeats and the echo of his own breathing. When the cabin came into view, he glanced back, just once. The cedar tree remained alone, grave newly formed at its base. But the feathers, they were gone. Not a single one remained on his coat, the saddle, or the dirt, as if they had never been there at all. He dismounted with a grunt, walked inside, and bolted the door. The sun was lowering fast now, bleeding red across the sky. He sat by the window with his rifle and stared out at the endless plain, expecting nothing. And yet beneath that growing dusk, something unseen settled into the land, like breath being held, waiting. The sun dipped low, bleeding into the horizon like a wounded beast. Shadows stretched long across the prairie, reaching for Silas Reed's cabin, as if the land itself meant to swallow him whole. He lit a lantern and set it on the table. The soft glow carved faint lines across his weathered face. His hands were still dirty from the burial. He didn't eat, didn't drink, just sat there, rifle across his lap, ears tuned to every creak and sigh of the timber walls. Then he heard it. Not footsteps, not wind. Silence. A silence too complete. He rose slowly, walked to the window, and looked out. They were there. 13 figures standing in a wide ring around the cabin. Women, barefoot, dressed in long white gowns stained by dust and time. Faces pale beneath the fading sky, features still and unreadable. Their hair hung limp, unmoving, even as the wind whispered through the grass. They didn't speak, didn't blink, just stood there watching. Silas's chest tightened. His grip on the rifle faltered for the first time in years. He stepped back from the window. The lantern's flame flickered. He checked the door, bolted, checked the back, clear. He tried to steady his breathing, but something inside him knew. This wasn't a dream, wasn't a warning. It was a reckoning. One of the women lifted her arm, slowly. Her hand, long-fingered and pale, pointed toward the east, toward the cedar tree. Silas didn't move. Her arm fell. The others remained still. He closed the shutters, fastened them tight, and backed away. His heart was a hammer now, beating too loud in the quiet. The women didn't advance. They didn't retreat. They didn't speak. They waited. He thought of the old man's words. They'll come when the sun dies. Bury me proper. Had he done it wrong? Or had it been too late? The lantern's flame danced higher, casting shadows that twisted like snakes along the walls. Silas sat back down. The rifle felt heavier than it should. The weight of memory pressed against his ribs. Memories of places he'd fled, people he'd left, names he hadn't spoken in years. He'd seen death before, plenty of it. But never this kind. Never death that stood on 2 feet and stared back through the night. He didn't sleep, didn't dare. Outside, the women in white made no sound, but as darkness swallowed the last light from the plains, Silas knew one thing for certain. They weren't there to wait forever. Something had been disturbed, and now the land remembered. By morning, the women were gone. Silas opened the door slow, rifle raised, half expecting to find 13 bodies lying in the dirt. But there was nothing. Just boot prints in the dust, his, and a wide ring of undisturbed grass where they had stood. He stepped out cautiously. The air was colder than it should have been, sharp, the kind of cold that bit through skin no matter how high the sun climbed. A crow watched from the rooftop, silent. He didn't like it. He went back inside and searched through the dead man's belongings. There wasn't much. A small satchel, cracked leather, worn smooth with age. Inside it, a folded parchment map, yellowed with time. A crucifix blackened by fire, and a letter, sealed with wax, brittle but unbroken. He hesitated, then broke the seal. The handwriting inside was jagged, desperate. The letter wasn't addressed to Silas, it was to my daughters. His gut twisted. It spoke of guilt, betrayal, and fear, of a fire beneath the mountain, of screams that didn't end with death. It told of a choice, his choice to leave them behind, to save his own soul at the cost of theirs. "If I die on cursed soil," it read, "they will rise. I beg you, forgive me, I was weak." The parchment trembled in Silas's hands. He set it down, jaw tight. He didn't believe in ghosts. Not truly. But something foul had taken root in this land, and it began with that man. He turned back to the window. Still empty outside. But the wind had changed again. It no longer whispered through the grass. It whispered his name. Not aloud, not in the world. But in the pit of his mind, a soft, childlike voice, Silas. He backed away from the window, tried to calm his thoughts. Maybe it was exhaustion. Maybe the isolation was catching up to him. But the memories came anyway. His mother's voice, low and grave, telling stories by lantern light. Tales of a preacher who ran west with stolen gold, chased by fire and judgment. Of 13 girls who followed him into the mines and never came out. Of how the wind still spoke their names. He hadn't believed her then, he believed her now. He looked at the crucifix again. The metal was twisted, almost melted, as if it had been held in flame. He didn't want to touch it, but he did. It was cold. Too cold. Outside something creaked, not wood, not wind. He grabbed the letter and held it tight. He didn't know what he was part of, not yet, but the pieces were there. The map, the cross, the letter, the whisper, and the silence that followed it. Whatever the old man had brought with him, it hadn't died with him. It was just beginning. Silas didn't sleep that night. He sat by the window, letter in one hand, rifle in the other. The map lay unfolded on the table. Lines drawn in faded ink led east past the gulch, through dry canyons and into the mountains. At the end of that trail, one word was scrawled, Ashwell. He hadn't heard that name in years. A mining town long dead, buried after a fire no one talked about. The place where the preacher's daughters had vanished. The wind howled again, and something scratched at the cabin roof. He didn't look up. By morning the air felt wrong. Still, expectant. He stepped outside and scanned the horizon. No sign of the women, no footprints, just the same dead quiet that had taken the land. Then he saw the door. Scratches covered it, dozens of them carved in neat, deliberate rows, not from animals, fingers, human. The wood was gouged deep, and at the center, one word had been etched again and again. Maria. His breath caught. That name. He hadn't heard it since... No, it wasn't possible. He stepped back, heart pounding. The letter burned in his hand. The preacher hadn't just cursed himself, he'd cursed the ground, and now that curse had found a new tether. Silas stared at the crucifix. It lay where he left it, untouched. But its shape had warped further overnight, twisted into something no longer holy. He remembered dreams, broken fragments from the dark hours, a fire, screaming children, shadows in white circling him, eyes glowing with blame, and always one face among them, younger than the rest. Her. He couldn't forget her. He tried. He walked outside, boots crunching over dry earth. The cedar stood distant but visible, the grave still fresh. But now something else lay beside it. A doll, old, burnt, dressed in white. His pulse thundered in his ears. He picked it up, hands shaking. The fabric crumbled like ash in his grip. He dropped it, turned and walked back to the cabin without looking again. Inside, he lit a lamp, sat down and stared at the map. Ashwell, the cursed town. The mine where it ended. Maybe that's where it could be undone. The letter said if the preacher died on cursed soil, they would rise. Well, he had. And now they had. Silas stood, gripping the letter tight. He didn't know what waited out there, but he knew this. The women wouldn't leave. Not until something was finished. The air around him thickened, cold crawling up his spine like fingers made of ice. From the corner of the room, the crucifix fell with a clang. The floor beneath it blackened like scorched earth. Silas didn't flinch. He'd faced death before, but this was something deeper. This was penance. Silas saddled his horse at first light. The wind had gone still again, the kind of stillness that made a man question the sound of his own breath. He didn't pack much, just water, jerky, a lantern, the rusted crucifix, and the letter. He left the rifle behind. Bullets didn't stop ghosts. The map led him east, through dry creek beds and canyons so narrow the sun barely touched the floor. Time lost meaning out there. Hours passed in silence, broken only by hoofbeats and the groan of saddlebags. He found Ashwell by accident more than map. The town was nothing now, just a sagging saloon, a collapsed church, and the yawning mouth of a mine swallowed by weeds and silence. The horse refused to go near it. No matter how hard Silas pulled, she bucked and snorted, eyes wide with fear. So he dismounted, tied her to a half-dead tree and approached on foot. Each step closer felt heavier. The mine entrance gaped before him, shored by rotting beams and a rusted sign that once read, Ashwell's Silver Co. The wind didn't blow there. The air didn't move. Silas lit his lantern. Inside, the walls pressed close. The flickering light caught old pickaxes, rotted boots and broken carts buried in dust. Farther in, burn marks lined the tunnel, black streaks across stone like veins of char. He kept walking. The path split 3 times. He followed instinct, or maybe something deeper, a pull in his gut guiding him downward. Then he saw them, dresses. Lined against the tunnel wall, 13 of them, burnt, tattered, but unmistakably white. Some still clung to charred bones. One held a singed ribbon tied into a perfect bow. Another clutched a melted doll's head. He didn't speak. Couldn't. Farther still, the tunnel opened into a chamber. It was wide, circular, hollowed out by hands long dead. In the center stood 13 iron bed frames, rusted but upright, untouched by time. A thin layer of dust coated the stone floor, undisturbed. No footprints, no signs of life. Yet the air pulsed like breath. Silas stepped closer. Something crunched beneath his boot. A tooth, small. He knelt beside one of the beds. A name was carved into the metal post. Lydia. He turned. Another read Esther. Another Miriam, but the one that stopped him cold, Maria. His fingers traced the letters. The room seemed to shudder around him, the lantern flame bending as if pulled by invisible hands. A sound echoed, not a voice, a whisper. He turned fast. They were there, all 13, standing just beyond the lantern's reach. Dresses white, eyes hollow, faces ageless. They didn't move, didn't speak. Until one stepped forward, Maria. She looked the same as in his memory, only colder. Her lips parted, and she whispered, "Free us." Silas couldn't speak. Maria stood before him, eyes like still water, reflecting nothing, yet filled with something older than grief. Behind her, the 12 others remained unmoving, their dresses whispering faintly without wind. She took another step, bare feet silent on the stone. Her face was neither angry nor kind. It simply was. He swallowed hard. "Maria, it can't be." Her lips moved again, no breath, just sound shaped from memory. "You left." He staggered back, lantern trembling in his grip. "I didn't know," he said, voice raw. "You knew enough." The room grew colder. From the tunnel behind them, the sound of distant crying rose. A child's sob, thin and unending. He turned to the iron beds, names etched on rusted frames. Lydia, Ruth, Esther, Miriam, Abigail. Each one carved with care, like headstones in the dark. He searched the chamber, heart pounding. 12 names and then the 13th. There, faint, hidden beneath ash. Maria Reed. His blood went still. "No," he whispered, "that's not possible." But it was. Deep down he'd always known. She was the secret he never spoke. The sister he'd buried in his mind after the fire. The one their mother said had gone east with the preacher when he promised salvation. Silas had stayed behind, afraid, angry. She had followed him, and now here she stood. "We waited," Maria said. "For him. Then for you." He dropped to his knees, not in prayer but collapse. The lantern tipped, casting jagged shadows across the walls. The women did not flinch. "I buried him," he said. "The preacher. Your father." "No." Her voice was soft, but sharp. "Our father." He looked up, stunned. "He said it in the letter. My daughters. You were one of them. He took us in. We prayed. We obeyed. And when the fire came, he ran, left us screaming." Silas trembled. "Why me?" "You carry his blood. Same guilt, same silence." "I didn't know," he said again, "but now you do." She knelt in front of him. Cold fingers touched his hand. Her skin was dry, like old parchment. "You can still make it right." He looked at her, the pain in her face, buried beneath years of ash and vengeance. "How?" "Burn the letter, bury the cross, at the place where he died, at dawn." "Will it free you?" "It will free the land," she said. "We'll follow." Silas nodded, though fear gripped every inch of him. He rose slowly. The women stepped aside as he backed toward the tunnel. Maria remained still, her eyes never leaving his. "Don't be late," she whispered. And then she was gone. Just like that. Silas turned and fled into the mine's dark throat, heart thudding like hooves on stone. The names stayed behind, watching, waiting. The sky was bruised with dawn's approach as Silas galloped across the plains, the cedar tree rising like a crooked finger in the distance. Each hoofbeat echoed the names carved in his mind. 13 girls, 1 sister, all bound to a man he never truly knew. And now to him. The letter pulsed against his chest, tucked inside his coat. The crucifix felt heavier than metal, like it carried every scream from that mine. The wind pushed against him, hot and sharp, and yet the horizon glowed cold. He reached the grave, just as the first light bled over the hills. The cedar stood silent, but they were already there, 13 figures in white. They didn't move, didn't breathe, just stood between him and the grave. Maria was at the front, her eyes no longer empty, but burning with something deeper. He dismounted, legs stiff, throat dry. "I'm here." Maria nodded once. "Begin." Silas knelt by the grave. The dirt had settled but not hardened. It still remembered the weight it held. He drew the letter from his coat, hands trembling. The women watched. He lit a match. The flame flared bright, too bright, as if the air itself were hungry. The letter caught, curled, blackened in his grip. The fire ate the words fast, releasing them into smoke. The moment the last ember fell, the wind shifted. The women took one step forward. Silas pulled the crucifix from his bag. It no longer looked like anything holy. Its edges curled inward, the metal veined with cracks like old earth. Maria raised her hand. "Bury it, where the lie began." He looked at the grave, took the shovel. The soil opened easily, too easily, like it had been waiting. He laid the crucifix inside, and the earth screamed, not with sound but with pressure. The sky darkened. The cedar split with a sickening crack, its trunk bursting open to reveal a pit beneath. Bones stacked like firewood, scorched black, mouths frozen in terror. Silas fell back. The women began to hum, low, unified. A sound older than language. The ground quaked beneath them, the air thick with heat and ash. From the pit, flames rose, not wild, but purposeful. They coiled around the crucifix, consuming it without touching the soil. The humming grew louder. The women stepped to the edge, one by one, until they formed a ring around the pit. Maria stepped forward last. She looked to Silas. "Thank you." Then she stepped into the flames. He lunged to stop her, but it wasn't fire anymore, it was light. Pure. And as she vanished, the others followed, one by one. No screams, only peace. When the last gown dissolved into ash, the flames collapsed inward. The pit sealed. The cedar, split but standing, shed its bark like old skin. Silas stood alone. The wind was gone. Only silence remained, a silence that felt clean. The morning light rose soft over the plains, brushing the hills in gold. For the first time in days, the sky was clear. No wind, no whispers. Just quiet. Silas stood beside the cedar tree, breath shallow. The grave was gone, the earth smooth, undisturbed. No trace of the preacher, the cross, or the fire. Only a ring of pale white flowers now bloomed in a perfect circle where the women had stood. He dropped to one knee and touched one. Warm. Alive. He didn't speak. There was nothing to say. His hands were blistered, his coat blackened with soot, his face drawn like someone who'd wandered through more than time. The land was still but changed, lighter somehow, as if a weight had lifted off its back. He rose slowly, body aching. The air no longer pressed in. It moved freely, unburdened. He mounted his horse and rode west. The cabin came into view just as the sun crested high. It looked the same, weathered and stubborn, but now it no longer seemed like a tomb. Inside, the air was clean. The scratches on the door were gone. The floorboards didn't creak under grief anymore. On the table lay a book. He hadn't left it there. Bound in cracked leather, it bore no title. Inside, a single page had been marked with a strip of white cloth. He opened it. The handwriting was old, faded, but readable. Debts of blood may stain the soil, but with fire, truth, and return, even the cursed may rest. No name. No date. He closed the book gently and stepped outside. The wind had returned, but now it sang instead of howled. He walked to the edge of his land and looked out over the prairie. Nothing moved, but the stillness was no longer threatening. It was peaceful. He reached into his coat and pulled out the revolver. It was still loaded, still worn with time. He stared at it for a long while. Then he dug a small hole near the porch and buried it. There was nothing left to shoot. He stood in silence for a long moment, then turned toward the barn. The sun was warm on his back. Later that day, he rode into town. Folks stared, not with fear, but wonder. The widow at the general store handed him a parcel wrapped in cloth. "Came with your name on it," she said. "No sender." Inside was a Bible. Old. Familiar. He opened it. Pressed between the pages was a photo. A girl in white, smiling. Maria. He didn't ask how it got there. He didn't need to. He nodded once to the widow and tipped his hat. Then he rode back out, leaving town behind. But the land rode with him. And this time it didn't whisper his name. It carried it, like something forgiven. Years passed. Ashwell remained a name no one spoke aloud, just a smudge on old maps and fading memories. The mine was sealed, the paths overgrown, but every spring travelers crossing the plains would pause near a twisted cedar tree. There, beneath the open sky, 13 white lilies bloomed in perfect formation. No one planted them. No one dared touch them. They grew where nothing else did, where the ground once cried and fire once roared, and beside them, always, a small stone. No name. Just a carving, a revolver and a cross side by side. Some said a preacher was buried there, others whispered of witches burned alive. A few told stories of a cowboy who faced death and made peace with it, but no one knew for sure. Only the land remembered. Those who lived nearby recalled the man in the cabin, tall, quiet, with eyes that saw through lies. They said he'd ride into town once or twice a season, never to talk, only to trade, then vanish again into dust and silence. Children dared each other to visit his cabin. Most turned back before reaching the gate. Those who knocked found it empty, but on the porch a chair always rocked in rhythm with the breeze. In time, even that stopped. One day the cabin door hung open, swinging slowly. Inside, nothing. No boots, no saddle, no man. Just a Bible left on the table. Open to a single verse. "And the last shall be first, and the dead shall rise incorruptible." That day the sky stayed grey. No storm came, just silence. A silence that felt complete. Over time the legend grew. Some said the cowboy vanished into the mountains. Others claimed he became a preacher himself, wandering from town to town, freeing cursed souls in quiet ways. But the story never faded. They still tell it. Of Silas Reed, The man who buried a stranger and was met by 13 silent women in white, of how he followed their ghosts, faced his past and traded steel for peace, a tale of ash, blood, and redemption. And if you ride far enough east, past where the roads end and the air begins to shift, you might find that cedar tree. The lilies still bloom. And when the wind changes, you might hear it. Not a cry, not a whisper, but a name, Silas. A name no longer bound by grief. A name carried by the land, like a hymn without words. If this story left a mark on you, subscribe now for more forgotten legends buried in dust and time. And don't miss what comes next. Click the video on screen and keep riding with us. Another tale waits just beyond the edge of dusk.